Hi, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Most people worry about money, so we created the Wisdom Metric framework to help people eradicate financial stress, generate a passive income, and build a prosperous retirement strategy. Today, you'll discover what should be included in every retirement budget. I'd love to get your thoughts about the proverb of the day. A man who cannot tolerate small misfortunes cannot accomplish great things. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. When it comes to creating a retirement budget, the three essential aspects that you capture are number one, the income that you want, number two, the expenses that you'll have, and number three, the legacy that you'll leave. When it comes to the income that you'll want in retirement, most people estimate it somewhere around 80% of what you're currently making. Now, this number can change depending on the type of retirement that you want. If you plan on kind of hanging out at the house, maybe reading a book, relaxing in the neighborhood, maybe just sitting on your porch watching the sunrise and the sunset, well, you may be able to live on 50% of your income. But on the other end, if you plan on traveling lavishly and going to all these amazing places and seeing the world and staying in 4 or 5 star hotels and maybe being launched into space or something like that, well, then you may end up needing more than even 100% of your current income. It really depends on what you want to do in retirement. That's why we start with the income that you want. And the question that you want to ask yourself is, where is my money coming from? How much of my income is passively being generated? Does my income already take things like inflation into consideration? And the reason these questions are important is because if you already have inflation being considered, well, it's estimated that roughly every 17 years, so we'll just say every 20 years, that the amount of income it takes doubles if you just kind of take the average inflation of 3% each year. What I mean is, if you were to spend, let's say, $100,000 on something today, you'll need $200,000 to spend that same, to purchase that same item in 20 years. If it maybe want to work our way into like a smaller number, if you spend $100 a week on groceries today, well, then you would have to spend $200 a week in 20 years because of inflation. So you'll want to have these things considered in your income. And some things that take that in consideration maybe is if your income is generated passively, maybe through real estate. Well, if it's rental income, then that often goes up with inflation. If you have money that's invested in things like the stock market and things of that nature, well, that often also takes inflation into consideration. It's just kind of built into the cake. But if your money is just sitting in a savings account, well, then you're not really accounting for inflation. So you'll want to at least keep that in mind when you're deciding how much of an income you want. If you plan on retiring at 50, well, you may be around for another 50 years, so you'll need to consider your income having to double every 20 years just to make sure you live the same lifestyle that you started with. The second thing that you'll want to consider is the expenses that you'll have. The expenses, as we just talked about a little bit in income, depends on the lifestyle that you want, but it also depends on how many things that you are taking into retirement. What I mean is, have you paid off your car? Have you paid off your house? Are you getting a new car or maybe a new house? Are you done with your student loans, or maybe you're paying for things for your kids? You want to consider all of these expenses when it comes to how much money that you'll need, how much of a budget, how many things that you have to cover, how much will be left over. All of these things need to be taken into consideration when it comes to the overall expenses that you'll have. A good place to start when you're creating your retirement budget is, just as I mentioned, how much am I spending on food? How much am I spending on my shelter? How much am I spending on, maybe just like credit cards and consumer debt? Just really try to figure out how much money that you're already spending. And then you want to also start taking into consideration, how much money do I plan on spending? Maybe what are the things that I'm adding? Am I traveling once a month to somewhere? Well, I need to include that in my retirement budget. Am I putting maybe money away that I wanted to like gift someone? Well, that's fine too. You want to consider that. Charitable needs is also part of many people's retirements. Whether you're talking about your favorite like cause you believe in, a nonprofit, your church, your children, maybe your grandchildren, maybe even your great grandchildren. This really is just things that you want to consider always in your expenses. So you want to list those things out. Things that you want to do, things that you have to continue paying off, things that you've already done. And then as we just started touching on the outskirts of, you want to consider the legacy that you'll leave in any retirement budget. If most of the time you end up leaving a legacy simply because we don't know how long we're going to live. What I mean is if you have, let's say, $1 million, and then you're going to spend, 10% of that every single year, well, then that means you're going to be spending $100,000 each year. So then you'll be out of money in 10 years. Now, on the other end, if you were somehow able to generate $10,000 or $100,000 every single year because you're generating a 10% return on your investments each year, well, now you're just spending the overall interest that you have. So you always have that same $1 million that you started with, as long as you're generating that money. And so that becomes true with whatever the number is. If you're trying to live off of less, maybe because you're hanging out in the house, well, are you generating enough of an income to cover how much you're taking out? Because the truth is, we don't know how long we're going to live. So if you don't know how long you're going to live, then you can't time it perfectly to run out of money on your very last day hanging out on earth. The truth is that you'll always want to be spending just the interest that's there, because that way you'll always be able to have the same lifestyle, the same income, and that's going to be the case in 10 years, 20 years, 100 years of technology kind of advances where you're just hanging out, because you're only spending the amount that you're generating each year. So you may want to start considering, well, what am I going to do with the base income? What am I going to do with that money? When I pass. And so when it comes to that, you want to make sure that you have different things set up. Now, this is where you're talking about basically your traditional estate planning. You want to make sure that you have the most tax efficient plan possible as far as your retirement strategy. You want to make sure that you have like your wills updated so that people don't have to fight over what's going on, and you just don't have that ugliness come out of people. And you also don't have just people kind of popping up saying that they knew you, that you were their secret love and their long lost friend, and all this other stuff. And so you want to make sure that you're taking things like that into consideration. So if you have a will, if you have a trust maybe set aside, if you want to give money, as we mentioned, to a cause that you believe in, how are you giving that to them? Did you set up something, like an insurance policy where they just receive that? Did you set up something where they give like a check? Do you have an executor of your will? Do you have someone who looks over maybe any of your legacy as far as your children are concerned? Or if you had a business, how is that transferred? I mean, it really is a lot of questions that we don't often think about. Even as simple as, do I list all of my passwords? Because if you pass and you wanted someone to kind of pick up where you left off, if it was like a business or something like that, well, did you give them your passwords? Do they know that that's what you expect to happen? Have you been grooming them? Do you have processes kind of written out so that people are able to continue successfully running the business? And the same is true as if you're like, hey, I want someone to watch over my pet, like my favorite dog. Well, did you tell that person ahead of time that you left the dog to them for them to watch? Do they know the kind of dog food that your dog wants? I mean, it sounds silly, but when you're making your retirement budget, you often have to consider, what are your retirement goals? Like, what are the things that I'm trying to accomplish? How do I want to live? What is my lifestyle? Who do I want to impact positively? All of these things need to be taken in consideration when you're making your retirement budget. So to recap, the three things that you want to consider in every retirement budget is the income that you want, the expenses that you have, and the legacy that you'll leave. If you want more help understanding your retirement needs, then check out my free Retirement Planning That Works video training at obsidianwisdom.com/training. This will be your first step on understanding the Wisdom Metric framework and how it can help you understand how to eradicate financial stress, generate a passive income, and build a prosperous retirement strategy. You'll recall our proverb of the day that I was talking about earlier, where a man who cannot tolerate small misfortunes cannot accomplish great things. This is true for you, it's true for me, it's true for all of us, that we're going to face misfortunes along the way. And so we need to be able to overcome those challenges to get to where we want to get to. As you'll hear me say a lot, I believe the financial results and most of the results we have in our life is tied to two things. One is our knowledge and our understanding. We can create the life that we have. That's why we've done it. To create a different life, we have to gain an understanding that extends past where we're at currently. And that transition often is going to have some small hiccups along the way. And this is true for Ellie Diab, especially, where she had success by most standards. What I mean is she was married, she had kids, she had a beautiful home, she had a beautiful life. And then she said that things started changing along the way where her marriage ended, she ended up losing her home, and she had to move back in with her mother while she's trying to get things situated. That even though she had a lot of success and a lot of accolades within her career and her personal life, that she realized that she didn't really have like two things. One, she didn't have any money kind of set aside, but two, she said she didn't have like really any passive income. She didn't have anything that was going to generate money for her even when she wasn't working. And so, like many of us, that ends up creating a lot of issues because the bills keep coming. And so she ended up moving back home to try to get resituated. Then she started applying for lots of jobs. And she said that she was turned down by over like 50 jobs where no one was hiring, that she had no options available to her. And so she ended up taking that $1,200 stimulus check and investing it in herself, investing it in starting a business. And so she ended up doing some research and found that people were looking for help on starting businesses. So she was like, okay, I'll understand more about that. I'll grow in that area. And then she said she wanted to help people figure out how to get the money that they needed. So she wanted to help them on establishing business credit and also how to get grants for different types of businesses. And these were two very important questions that people would need to have answered if you wanted to start a business. And so she went from living, at home with her mom, struggling with her raising her four kids and trying to find work and dealing with all of that to building herself into this ability to start her own company. And she said within the first year, about 10 months into it, that she was able to build her company to over $1 million. And the transition that she goes through is the same that any of us go through, is that you're going to start off by being the master of just your past life, and you're going to be a novice in the new life you're trying to build. And like any novice, you're gonna fall along the way. But if you keep getting up, if you do something long enough, you cannot help but figure out how to do it. You cannot help but to grow. I love the story of like someone who started trying to, like train in martial arts and they wanted to become a black belt. Well, a lot of the times a black belt is a sign that you did something without giving up. It's not as much that you were this prodigy and this natural. Sure, that happens. But more times it's a sign that you did something for 5 or 10 years without quitting. And the truth is, all of us have the capacity, the ability to become a master as long as we're willing to put in the work and the time necessary to grow in mindset first and then in action second. And so I'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts on what that proverb means to you. If you have any thoughts or examples that it maybe rings true for you. But when it comes to understanding the change that you want to create in your life, you have to first understand, as we're talking about the wisdom metric framework. And if you want to watch that free video training, then you can go to obsidianwisdom.com/training. But we talk about really how you have to have the knowledge of what you're trying to do. You have to have the understanding of why you're trying to do it. And then you have to have the wisdom of knowing how to do it. And until next time, Wisdomites, remember, wisdom is asking the right questions to allow yourself to get the right answers. Keep asking those questions and you'll keep getting those answers. Continue blessings.